Blender film review. If this is your first time here, the reason we like to do these Blender film reviews is because like Blender ultimately is a means to an end, right? Whatever you want to create, if it's a video game, if it's a short film, if it's a web comic or characters, creatures, whatever it is, we are all trying to get to that end result. And the Blender Animation Studio also does that by creating animation short films themselves. And so it's good to not only study how to do things in Blender, but also study the end result so that we can, all achieve that goal and improve our art. So that's what we're doing here. And we've got the band back together, so to speak, with Tim Von Rueden and Wayne Dixon and Jonathan Lampel. They've done this with me before. Tim is a CG Cookie alum. He worked with us for several years. A very, very gifted concept artist. In fact, if you have watched any of our concept tutorials, there's a high likelihood that he was the one teaching. So Tim, it's great to have you, sir. How are you doing?
Great to be here. I'm excited to be here.
Good. Awesome. It's always a pleasure. You bring a interesting perspective, not being a Blender head yourself, but a film buff. So we really appreciate your perspective and your eye. So Wayne, how you holding down?
Tear down a movie.
Wayne, how you doing in Australia?
I'm good, Kent. Yeah, I'm over here in Australia. I forget that when I talk to you guys all have American accents and I have an Australian accent, and I just realized that now. Like, and you didn't say who you were. Everyone, this is Kent Trammell. He is awesome as well. I'm not sure where we are on the screen because we've got a different screen to you. So I'm going to guess that you're down. Are you down there? I don't know where you're up there.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sending you good vibes, Kent, because we had a lot of technical issues, and you got through them, Kent. So yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna go good.
Thanks to the good vibes, probably. If we're honest. Lampel, how you doing, sir?
Doing pretty good. It's middle of July. Has been super nice, except for the last couple of days. It's been pretty rainy out on the West Coast, and so it's actually a pretty fine evening to spend inside watching films.
Good deal, man. Good deal. Your hair
it's evening for you guys, isn't it? Did anyone go and get a coffee before this stream?
No.
Kind of. I made myself
because I was like, oh, you got a coffee now. Because it's like, it's nighttime. It's time for you guys to go to bed. And I just could picture you guys in the middle of the night, like awake because you're on your caffeine hit going, I was trying to be meta. Like,
meta.
So I got water, even though it is the morning time for me, but I went and got my coffee run earlier this morning.
Good deal. I had coffee in the morning too, but yeah, special nighttime stream, which we don't usually do. I was hoping that there would be some more faces who don't usually get to watch at 2 in the afternoon. But yeah, if you're new and if you're in the chat, don't hesitate to throw your thoughts out and ask questions. That's a good part about the live stream is the interaction. So yeah, thank you guys for being here. We can get to it since we do only have 40 minutes, but this is the Blender film review of Coffee Run, the latest short film from the Blender Animation Studio. I think technically only the second one released under that official designation. But I usually like to start with a stat sheet of the film. And so it was released in 2020, directed by Hjalti Hjalmarsson. It's a life goal to pronounce his name correctly, and that's my progress thus far. As far as I can tell, based on when the blog announcement came out, it was in production for about 5 to 6 months, and a total crew of about 17 people, 7 of which were Blender artists, and the first open movie rendered with Eevee primarily. So
cool.
Yeah. And now, since it is a short film, only like 3 minutes long, we can watch it. So I will. I'm going to mute you. Well, actually, can you just be quiet because I can't actually mute you, and then we'll play through the film. That was it. Did y'all watch it, by the way? The three of you with me?
We couldn't see it then, but I pushed play at the same time that you pushed play.
Same.
Thank
Although
you.
I was
Thank you.
watching it.
Because you said shut up and don't talk, so I was just like making the sound effects in my mind as it was going along.
Thank you for doing that. I figured we were on the same wavelength. All right, so that is the film, and we loosely like to structure the conversation on three sort of topics going forward. Okay, so the first one being the story, the narrative elements. Most of us being kind of film, wannabe gurus, I guess. I mean, Tim's not a wannabe, but like me at least. But so we like to talk about that and explore things like a character development, interpretation of meaning, things like that. And then the next thing we'll do is look at artistry, right? The visual style, aesthetics of the film, kind of see the expressions of the artist behind the film. And then we'll end up with technical execution, which is like the Blender nerdy things, where we talk about, animation and modeling and shading and all that good stuff. So starting with the story, and the first question I wanted to get going is, it's based on the tagline, or not the tagline, but like on the official website for the short. The little description is: fueled by caffeine, a young woman runs through the bittersweet memories of her past relationships. And Hjalti has talked about this being about intrusive thoughts and kind of repeating those in your head and analyzing them over and over, asking what if, stuff like that. Without trying to get too heavy too quickly, did any of you relate quickly to this and that aspect of like almost haunting memories, intrusive thoughts? Anybody?
For me, no, not that. Yeah, I kind of related to it differently, like, because I haven't. I've seen a little bit about the making of and what Hjalti and the team thought about it, but not a lot. And I intentionally didn't watch any of that, so it wouldn't sway my opinion before or during this live stream. But the thing that I related with it was, it's a side scroller video game, and that's the instant. That's what I thought of, because growing up in the 80s and 90s playing side scrollers, you're like, oh, cool. And then it was just so I didn't get a lot of it, passed by before I'd even paid any attention to it before. So I missed a lot of it the first time, if you know what I mean. It was like, it's going past, and then it was like, I should have paid attention to that thing, which is now out of view. So yeah, I on first viewing, I didn't relate to it on that regard, Kent, but I did on the video game side of things. You're like, video game, I get this. This is cool. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yes, I did see what you mean. Someone else had mentioned the video game aspect, actually. Who was that? I think a member mentioned it. Hold on a second. Let me see. Mikal said, I'm looking forward to what you guys thought, but she liked the style of the gameplay loop. So she thought that was cool. Interesting. I didn't immediately get the video game vibe, but I totally see why you would. Absolutely.
You didn't? Did you connect with it as the intrusive memories then?
My initial thought, I think, was shared by also from Mikal. I had the same thing, and Wes mentioned in the chat that it took him a little while to understand what was going on. Like, it just went right over his head. And I can relate. The first viewing, I didn't even notice. I think it took 2 cycles to realize that things were changing within each cycle. Yeah. So there were some subtle changes, almost maybe too subtle, arguably. Yeah. But the first viewing was, I was just kind of blank. Like, I didn't know what to think about it. But then as I watched, as soon as I realized things were changing, it's like, okay, so it's not just kind of a weird loop, over and over. There are things to kind of analyze. And at the time, I didn't even think of them as intrusive memories. Is that, I don't even know if that's like a clinical term of like a, I don't know, like a
intrusive thoughts. Yeah. Okay. It's like,
it is.
Yeah, it's unwanted intrusive thoughts is the technical words. I'm real good at words. Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. As I watched it more and more and started to analyze it more and more, I definitely started to appreciate it more as that being the narrative. I thought that was, the more I thought about it, I thought it was kind of clever, to be honest with you. Anybody else, like, did you relate to it?
I mean, I can see Wayne's point. I feel, especially with video games, it felt like a combination of Mirror's Edge, and then it had some Sonic blips, and then even like a Rayman, one of the new ones that had more of that graphic style. So it definitely played off of that. And then seeing it be a Blender movie and it being the first time using the style, I thought it was kind of cool seeing how diverse a Blender movie can be. Because everything before this was very much 3D. And I will agree, though, it wasn't until the third loop that I picked it up and I kind of got what was going on. And I know I talked to Kent, I think, a little bit about this, about how what threw me off most was the ponytail and the fact that her character in the past, I know it sounds so simple, but since things are moving so quickly, having the character look different, and to me, I know they had similar color clothes, but that's what it didn't catch on me until the third loop. And I agree with Wayne too on how things go so fast that oftentimes you're not picking up the details, because we're used to this in animation where they shove a lot of visuals at us and they're not supposed to be digested. They're just aesthetically pleasing. So it took me a little bit to digest, oh no, there's actually a loop going on. And it's when she does her little pauses at the coffee shop that you then get a moment to think about all that you saw. And I felt like they didn't give enough of those moments. But I do agree with Kent. I do think it was clever overall, because I know I've had my issues with the last one, Spring, and it being too digestible to a point where it's basically you're getting what you're seeing. Where this movie, you kind of had to unpack the narrative that they're telling. I will say, though, the first time I viewed it, I couldn't help but reflect on how, in my mind, violent it felt. I know that might seem weird, but I even, when I watched it the first time after you told me, Kent, I was taking notes, and my first note was, this is really violent. And I think they're little things. To me, violence doesn't have to be blood and gore, but I wrote down, after watching it, I wrote down the second time what I thought was violent. And it was, you're picking up a cat, you're throwing it out the window. She's jumping on a pregnant woman's belly, which pushes the baby out. She stomps on two people's head at the wedding. And every single time, the first woman that she steps on, there's a crack noise as if she just broke her neck. And like each of these times that these happened, I was so taken back by those moments that I couldn't even focus on what the actual story was. Oh, and then also, I mean, pushing the baby casket into the grave, I guess, I don't know, that felt weird to me. But then the skateboarding on a baby carriage and then flying off of a cliff, I'm like, there's a baby. And in the third loop, it's crying. So I'm watching this baby being like flung off a cliff. It just felt a little, and then obviously she lands on the car, destroys it. So from my first time viewing, I was like, this feels weirdly violent. And I know it's probably not the tone they were going for. I don't know if it's just because I've been playing The Last of Us 2 recently, and that seems to be very violent. So I think that's just been on my mind of how violent media is nowadays. I know that's probably not the intention. I may be just a soft-boiled egg, but that was my first impression.
I picked up on that too, Kent. Like, especially, like, I think the pregnant belly and the lady's neck at the wedding each time. But it's like, yeah, if the sound effects were different, although I did love the music and I did love the sound effects. I think that was beautifully done. Although if it had been different, like if it was like a boing, like a computer game sound when you jump on them, it changes the whole meaning. It's no longer violent. It's like fun. You're like, boing, I just broke someone's neck by jumping on a turtle and turning it into a coin. You know what I mean? Like, it's not violent.
I mean, I think it's definitely like intended to be shocking. Like, I think that's pretty obvious that like it's sort of in the style of maybe like a little Quentin Tarantino or like what was that movie recently, Jojo Rabbit, where it's like it is very violent, but it also has this like style of like humor to it. And so it did like shock me for sure. And it was like, whoa, I did not see that coming. But looking back at it after and like thinking about it, then it like makes sense that this woman is like remembering things in like a very harsh way. And like, that's what's haunting her, or that's what's like following her around. And I think if it was like super soft and like there wasn't anything that was like worth being concerned about in the future, then it would like lose its meaning kind of, because then it wouldn't be something that would actually haunt her.
I could possibly see that. I know even with, what was the Cosmos Laundromat, is it called? Yeah. I really actually like it, but I rewatched it today as we were prepping for this one. And I remember the first decision to show the sheep actually hanging himself and like struggling for a bit before the tree branch breaks. I think taste comes into concern for me, and I felt like that was
Oh,
in
sure.
poor taste. I think
Mm.
in the it's like minor little tweaks. Like in that one, if it would have started with the sheep being like, "Oh, drat," and you just hear the twig snap, you don't see it, and then you see him walking in the field like attached to a log with a noose. You kind of get what they were going for. I think sometimes when it's so dead on, I think I can see the Tarantino aspect where sometimes there's more meaning behind the violence. I do agree with you, and maybe that was supposed to reminisce how painful her past feels for her. But I will say, as a viewer, I found it a little distracting.
Yeah, sure. And that can definitely like kind of take you out of it
Mm-hmm.
and have you relate to it less. Definitely.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know Yalti super well. I met him at 2013 CRAVE, and we spent a lot of the weekend together. But he is a very funny guy, like humor in everything, and very enjoyable to be around in that way. But also has like kind of a dark humor to him. So whenever I saw all those things, my initial thought was like that it has Yalti written all over it. Just I don't know, almost like you making fun of things you shouldn't make fun of. Like those type of people. But it does it introduces like an uncomfortability for me, like even watching those memories. Like when I think about, I don't necessarily struggle with like, I don't know if I could say I struggle with intrusive thoughts, but I do have certain memories that crop up that like embarrass me or make me cringe, and so they do make me uncomfortable when they just randomly pop up. And seeing those things happen, the broken neck and like jumping on the pregnant belly and the baby pops out, like it makes the scene uncomfortable when the visuals could make me feel like, oh, this is fun. I like being here. And then it immediately kind of makes me feel the other way when those things happen. But I don't know. I wish he was here to answer, but that felt like his signature a little bit, those certain elements. Let's see. I have some notes myself. If anyone else has anything to say, I'm going to read over these real quick.
Oh, I was going to say I think people usually can pick up on usually halfway through that there's things looping. I think what threw me for a loop was the fact that they weren't in order. And thankfully we have YouTube comments to help us out. So then I was presented the exact order things were in. And it made more sense seeing it in that order. I almost wish the loops happened in that order, because if I was I'd have to watch it like 5 or 6 times, which maybe again could be the intention, and maybe it's supposed to be the viewer to then like investigate and dive deeper. But I think that was also throwing me off on, I didn't really figure out when the loop ended or stopped until I rewatched it the second time, and then it kind of made sense to me. And then you talked about the minor nuance differences, and that's another thing. Thankfully, the YouTube comments are there because someone picked apart all of them, and I read through all of them. And yeah, a lot of them were just like minor things. Would be one person yelling, both people yelling, one person yelling, or the baby crying in one, baby smiling or giggling in another. I think, I agree with maybe having some more different things could have helped create the narrative that she's remembering things slightly differently each time, but enough where the viewer would understand where that's coming from, or to be able to pick up on that. Overall, though, I don't want to dog too much on this because I actually do like this one better than Spring. And I think there's a lot to discuss here. So that's why I'm curious to see your guys' opinions on it.
I would agree with that. Like, I didn't find there was enough changes in that. You had to rewatch it again to see that. And is that, I don't know whether that's a good thing. Like, do you want someone to have to rewatch something to get it? Like I made my wife watch this because I said, oh, we're going to do this stream on this video. And there's a couple things that she didn't pick up on. She's a drama teacher, so she knows narrative and stuff. She didn't realize that the characters in the background were actually the same person. And when it looped, she didn't know that there was any difference at all. So I said, what did you think about the slight changes? And she went, was there changes? And I'm like, well, did you understand that was her from a younger time? She said, was that the same person? Like, and this is someone who understands the meaning of that. And it's like, okay, well, it didn't hit home for my wife. So I guess a lot of people will be in that boat where it wasn't a big enough point, like it wasn't clear enough, especially on the first viewing, where you want some things to be clear. And I felt like that, like when it looped, like halfway through the second loop, I was like, oh, it's looping, but I kind of lost interest because there wasn't enough of a change. It was like, I'm like, oh, I know what's going to happen. The same thing's going to loop over and loop over. It's just one of those animation tests which goes as an infinite loop. And then I realized, oh, something's slightly different. But what was that? I missed it. I can't remember the first time. So I don't know. I had to watch it again to see, oh, no, there was a difference. One person yelling, two people yelling. It just wasn't enough change to be noticeable, in my opinion.
Same for me. I'm definitely like a little bit more dense and like not observant. When I watch movies, I just generally just sit back and like, oh, that looks cool. But I definitely like didn't pick up on that until like the very end. And then like, that's when I finally connected. Oh, that's actually the same woman. Like I just completely missed that. So I did not, back to the original question, like I didn't relate to that right away. That wasn't something that like I like felt. But then like once it was like explained, then it's like, oh, that's super cool. I love the concept. But I didn't like feel it initially.
That makes sense.
I saw at the end with all the coffee cups on the ground, and I was like, can't you use a reusable cup? Think of the environment.
The real statement of those.
Yeah.
I think this is a good case of how a small change could make a big impact. I think if the short would have started with her sitting in that chair with no cups on the ground and not drink, and then picking one up, sipping, and then going and showing like that was the first frame, that is where we're starting from, and that signifies the start of the loop. To me, that would have been a better introduction, because then I would have got that that's the same character from the start, and I wouldn't have been questioning it at the end. Because I mean, I try to analyze and pick apart movies even while I'm watching them. And this one, I have to admit, it took me till the third time to even pick up that it was the same person, because something as simple as a ponytail, when you're breaking down character design to be so simplistic, that change can make it a different character for me.
That's good. Yeah, I think if she started in the chair, you'd know. And then when she loops off and she grabs the cat and throws it out. Poor cat. What did the cat do?
Well, again, I feel like that was Yalshti, because he posts tweets of his cat. I think they call it
Pixel.
His
cat, but his cat is black and white. And maybe like his cat has the two opposing forces, like the good and evil. And the white part is, the good part. And it's like, stuff you, good part.
For some reason, I just saw it as like an inside joke to his cat. For some reason, like, I love my cat, but here's my character throwing.
You're going out the window.
Yeah.
Maybe just like peed on the couch that morning. He's like, not today.
Well, actually, it only looped through 3 times, so there's 6 more times he can do that. So that's all right.
The more that I'm thinking about it, what is the context of the cat being thrown out of the window? Like, I think in terms of the story, that's why to me, it really felt weird the first time watching it, because I was trying to connect what was going on. And like, I didn't understand why the baby, like if it was a picture of her husband that she was throwing through the window, I think that's another thing that could have added to the story. But the cat to me was so distracting. I didn't get it. I still don't get it, to be honest. Maybe it's an inside joke, but then I think it kind of hurts the story for me, because I'm like, I don't understand why she's throwing her cat out the window.
I don't remember. Does it appear anywhere else in the loop?
I think there's almost always. I think there's almost always a very white thing in each scene.
Yeah.
Whether it's the stroller or like the wedding dress, the gray, what is it called? The casket. Yeah, thank you. So I don't. So here's what I think about this kind of enters into the aesthetics, but I think it touches on why the cat would even be in the film. Like my first viewing, I see where people get this video game kind of feeling from, because this main character is like doing superhuman things, jumping from building to building, and like throwing the cat out, like very video game-esque, right? Stuff you can't do in reality. And so you could almost split her apart in like as a parkour segment, right? As a parkour element all to herself. But that's like a facade, like this superhuman facade, video game non-reality facade on top of this extremely human, very common set of memories, right? Like so many people deal with a death or go through marriage, breaking up, arguing, like all these things that the memories are about. So that's like super common. But because they're memories in her head, she can travel through them in any way she likes. And since she does it a lot, it's almost recreational in a video game sense, that's the only way I was able to tie them together. Two very different ideas kind of melding. But I too do tend to agree with Tim that it risks hurting the story when you have some of those elements, like the cat being thrown.
Sure, that makes sense. I think if I had to stick a meaning on it, from like what I would think after
Nice.
when I was like watching it, it was like the cat kind of represents like the loneliness after she lost those people from her life, that she just has her cat. And that's kind of like the frustration coming out at that like aspect of her life. Perhaps, but that's the only thing I could think of.
See that. I can see that.
It does say we only have 9 minutes left on the call, Kent. So obviously
did
the
see
upgrade
that.
didn't work.
That is embarrassing. It did not. All right,
I can assure you, Kent is not being a tight ass. He's paid to upgrade, and Zoom is not working. Probably
tested
because
it
it's got
today.
Corona like everything else.
Today, this morning. But anyway.
The timer is a reflection of the short that we're watching.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll stop it, and then I guess I'll call you back. I don't really have. It's going to be awkward for the people watching, but anyway, oh well. I do like the conversation and where it's going. Based on what you guys were saying about like how little it's changing, I kind of am really caught in the middle, because on one hand, I love films that give you more to find the more you watch, right? That make you dig. And I really appreciate that about films. And this one does that. And they mentioned in the making of, Yalsti was part of it and then had to leave the stream. But they mentioned someone who had broken down all the little changes, like, bullet point by bullet point. And they were said, oh, Yalsti would be so proud of that, so happy that someone did that. So I definitely think there was an intention to make the changes have to be sought out. So on one hand, I really respect that. And I think it's clever, tied up into this like intrusive thoughts, replaying the memories, maybe playing the game of what if, or like remembering them slightly differently. I think that's really clever. On the other hand, whenever I've seen movies like Edge of Tomorrow, I think is the one with Tom Cruise, where he has to repeat, like that alien fight. And I kind of feel insulted as a viewer for being forced to watch the same thing over again. There's another movie I think called Vantage Point that like, an assassination happened and you saw the event from different people's perspectives. So like, I don't like movies like that because I feel insulted a little bit as the viewer. And then on the other hand, as a production, like as a CG artist, I'm like, what a clever way to get max output for the minimum input. You know what I mean? Like being able to reuse animation and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm really caught in the middle between respecting it and feeling like it was, I don't want to say cheap, but like a little bit of a gimmick. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. I'm usually with you, Ken, where I usually do appreciate subtlety more than like in your face. I think what the things they should have changed though a little bit were maybe the things that were white, or instead of it being a cat every time, maybe one time it is something different, or a shoe or a photo frame, whatever it might be, where I don't know if the changes really add much to the narrative besides her reflecting on her past, but I think you kind of get that by the second loop, at least by the third loop, I got it, that she was reflecting on her past, and maybe they weren't always the same, but I don't know if the fact that they weren't always the same added much to the narrative besides her memory might be a little foggy. But like I said, I actually like this one. So I think me critiquing it is more like nitpicking, and I like that it creates a conversation afterwards. I just think I was so distracted by what I would have felt or what I would think they did kind of wrong, especially with how violent it felt for me, that was so much more the message of what I took away from it was, wow, that was a really weirdly violent short without being bloody, rather than here's a woman reflecting on her past and how misguided her thoughts are. But I do like things that play on metaphors or like analogies. So immediately I wrote down outrun her past. And I'm sure there's plenty of similar analogies or metaphors that this whole short kind of encompasses. So I do like when a visual kind of represents something like that. It's like a visual companion to a phrase or a quote.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys, what did you think the coffee represented? or why that played a role in her story, and
I'm
an
curious what
increasing.
you guys think.
I guess it would be addiction, for one, and hating the environment for not using a reusable cup.
Wayne got hung up on that part. Yeah,
I think it could be addiction, and maybe people can transpose their own addictions, or what, whether they're addicted to social media, because you can see her sometimes, on her phone or whatever, or maybe she's addicted to not wanting to grow up, or maybe she is addicted to caffeine or something harder, alcohol or whatever. So maybe that's it. Although I would like everyone kind of does relive their own memories in their mind, but I don't know if you guys are like me. I relive them, and then I imagine what I wish would have happened. And if I have an argument, I say all the right things, and I was like, haha, I win the argument. Like there's does anyone do that? Like when you relive it, you're like, this is how it should have gone. And you're like, magic. You're like, yes, I said all the right things. I walk out of that place and everyone's like, he's a champion.
I mean, maybe an argument. I will definitely relive an argument that way.
Yeah. And you win the argument.
I definitely sound a lot smarter in the second.
I would also say the coffee to me represented addiction, but specifically addicted to her past. And she was fueled by it. And I felt like that's all she could think about. And I almost wish it would have degraded over her thoughts. Like it started really happy and you see the loop go. And then as she keeps drinking the coffee, it gets more into what actually happened, which then the last loop I think would have been the sad, mad one. And then she's left sitting with her coffee around her, kind of as a reflection of how much she's addicted to wanting her past to be something that she's imagining when it's far from the reality she's stuck in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Wayne, when you talked about like kind of manipulating your memories and what you would have said differently, what choices you would have made differently, perhaps that's kind of what I got from the coffee, because I would have expected, like in the outrun your past, like you're haunted by it but you want to forget it, that would maybe lend more towards like an alcoholism. But like a caffeine keeps you up, I think that does kind of suggest like an obsession over these memories. Like I want to continue reliving them and like manipulating them in my head to how it could have gone better, which I don't know. I don't know. Do people do that? I guess like obsess.
I think that's not a bad like analogy, where coffee, like, it gives you energy in the short term, but like after a while you crash. And that could certainly be like a way to view those like negative memories, where it's like it might fuel you in the moment, and then like over a long term it just like really makes you crash. So I could see that kind of being the way that they want to communicate that.
That's a good point. Well, we only have 2 minutes. That might be a good time to end this call and then start it up again. With the magic of editing, you'll never know that this happened. So
I feel sorry for the people who are watching in real time.
I know.
Maybe they can relive this. Grab a cup of coffee and relive this memory.
Right. Take a bathroom break. Digest what we're talking about. Come back.
That's it. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna run the intro video just so you don't see this ridiculous like phone call setup again, and then we'll be back in a few minutes. Well, unmute. Okay, everybody. I think we're back. The fresh Zoom call. So we can go another 40 whole minutes. I think we'll be done before then, but anyway.
Do it, Kent.
All right.
Do it.
So
start it again.
Wayne did have the brilliant idea to start the stream over again. Exactly. Loop it out of respect for what we're talking about. But what we did do is change a couple things in our backgrounds. So be looking for that and see if you can find what things changed. So yeah, I think we can kind of wrap up the narrative part of the discussion, and we can go on into the artistry part, like the visuals, the visual identity of the film. So does anyone want to start, or I can start?
If you want to start, I just want to say one little thing, because usually when I watch, I try to pick up on like little Easter eggs throughout. I did find one, and partially because I actually paused the screen when I was writing take notes, and then when I look back up I notice it. On the skate ramp there is Susan the monkey.
Dude, that's brilliant.
I don't think I
They,
noticed that.
I did not notice that either. In fact,
The
they
skate
mentioned in
ramp at the start, or
The what?
let's see. I'll
So
go
it's not
find
the
it.
ramp.
On the
it's
side of the
at
ramp.
37 seconds.
37 seconds. Let me find that on the video.
Sorry, not to
37.
derail the whole.
No. That's the kind of good
okay.
stuff.
Yeah.
37 seconds.
Like that kind of stuff is always fun to me. I hate to admit it, but I'm kind of one of
right
those
there.
Pixar nerds that I like finding the Easter eggs and like looking throughout the scene, you know?
That's really clever. On the making of, they mentioned that was kind of a challenge to the people watching, like see if you can find the Suzannes. He said like there were 46, but he might have been joking. But that's definitely
46.
one. Yeah, that might have been a joke, but that's pretty cool. I did not notice that the graffiti, Suzanne graffiti. That's the one you're talking about, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Went right over my head. That's clever.
I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on the style because obviously if this was made in Blender, this is a totally different take on using the software, right?
Definitely. And there's some like I did watch the making of. I don't know if Kent did as well, but there's definitely some techniques that I didn't think about. And I was like, oh, that's very clever.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But yeah.
I think on the visuals, it's not too far removed from the glass half full, where that was non-photorealistic. They did viewport rendering for that, but if memory serves me correct, that was Blender internal. Is that what they used? Because it was pre 2.8, so Eevee wasn't invented yet, but it was a similar style of flat cartoon, all OpenGL.
Was that all grease pencil?
No, I think it was. What is it? The render bench, workbench.
Workbench is what 2.8. What the OpenGL thing. So Workbench was invented, or they renamed it, I guess, or whatever. That's 2.8. Okay. So Glass Half was pure before OpenGL, whatever that is, the internal.
It's not even Blender internal. It's just the viewport OpenGL stuff. Interesting.
Yeah, viewport OpenGL. So the viewport OpenGL, I'm not sure if that's a technical right word for it in 2.8 plus. That is Workbench. So that's how Blender draws everything. It's with their Workbench engine, which is a funny name. But anyway, yeah. So I found it similar to that. Yeah, what else were we talking about at the moment?
I agree with you. I was going to agree with your point that when I was looking through all of their films, that was the only one that it seemed similar to. And I still think there's like some differences. Like Glass Half had that unique like picture frame aesthetic throughout all the shots. Like it was kind of locked into that. I thought that was pretty clever and unique. And in a similar way, I like to see them doing something a little different using Eevee, because when Eevee came out, like people were excited that you could do basically semi-photorealistic stuff with it. But with this one, they used Eevee and did the opposite, like nothing photoreal. But
which I think is good technique to show as well, because agreed. I think that's what's still missing in Blender is when you used to do the Blender internal stuff. It's like, yeah, you had photorealistic and everyone used cycles for that, but the Eevee doesn't quite. I think it's getting there, but it doesn't quite match all the technical abilities that the Blender internal would do. And I think with this week they added motion blur, which I think is an upgrade. Like that it needed that. Yeah, so it's good to see it advancing. So I'd be interested to compare what Blender internal could do versus what Eevee can do now, because I know at the start of 2.8 it wasn't quite there yet. And as you know, Kent, like we've been using it in a couple of projects, and it wasn't all there. Like you couldn't do the compositing that you needed to do. You still need to use the cycles, vector blur, and then so you've got to render it twice. But there's just workarounds that you need to do. So I'd be interested to see how close it is to being like feature complete now from 2.9.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's got to be way better than what we've used up to this point. Just render passes alone will be a huge improvement. Did you, Wayne? I'm curious to hear what you thought about the animation style, like the kind of stuttery.
So it's a mixture of twos and ones, which is great. So that's I guess if anyone's seen Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, of course you have. If you haven't seen that, like what are you?
Get out
Like,
from under
Can't
the
even call
rock.
yourself an animator if you haven't seen it.
yeah, so it's great. So I really love the Helty and Pablo's animation. I'm not sure who did what, but to me it looks like Helty did the main loop, and there's slight changes. So he's only had to animate it once, which I think is pretty clever. But we've already spoken about how maybe it could have been varied a little bit, and perhaps Pablo did the background characters or whatever. So yeah, it's a mixture of twos and ones. It's really great. There's a lot of squash and stretch with the things being warped. So for example, I've just got this freeze frame of when she hits the car on my screen. You guys can't see that.
I'll find that in the video.
You'll find it.
Where
you
she
can
hits
scrub
the car.
through. There's lots of points where she warps.
Oh wow,
and
yeah.
Yeah,
She's
so she
like
hits the car, so it's
deformed.
44 seconds. You can see she's bending and warping. So there's lots of places where that happens.
Right.
When she jumps up and goes and then shoots into the is it the basket, the baby carriage? So she warps down and she's got the power up. She stretches down. There's a lot of squash and stretch. Twos and ones. It's really great. It's great body mechanics. Like he's done a really good job. Really subtle stuff.
Can you talk a little bit more about the twos and ones and like what feeling that brings?
Sorry. So I'm pretty sure this is animated on 24 frames per second.
That's
so
right.
anyone who doesn't know what twos and ones are, ones is where you animate and there's movement on every frame. Twos is where you hold the same frame for 2 frames and then it changes on frame 3. And threes is, you hold the same frame for 3 frames. Fours, I'm pretty sure you can figure out what fours are. And what Spider-Man did was they did a mixture of ones, twos, threes. I'm not sure if they did fours, but it was a mixture of all over the place. Now, the clever thing that they did is they used it, and what Helty's done here is they've used it when they've needed to kind of get an effect, which is it's really good. And I think Spider-Man changed that, and now people are doing it, and it's a more interesting thing. It's actually advanced animation, in my view. It's more fun to watch, because normally, if you did something like this, there'd be 24 frames, and each frame would be different, and it'd be smoother. But you don't always want smooth animation. So it's an aesthetic effect that he's gone for, which I think is really great.
Yeah. I'm glad you were able to explain that to me, because I didn't connect it to Into the Spider-Verse immediately, but I remember that like being a big deal when it came out, the twos and ones mixture.
Well, yeah, even like the characters in the same shot, like one character is on ones and the other one's on twos, like no one has done that. People, you'd be looking at that going, your animation is broken, but they made it work.
Interesting. Do you think they did that in here, where like some of the background characters might be on a different?
I haven't paid any attention to the background characters, other than the main characters is the proposal scene. So where he gets down on his knee, and then the what's her name? It's Rain, isn't it? They've used the Rain character.
That's right. Yeah.
So young Rain, no ponytail, could be someone else. Rain. When she sits on his knee, there's a lot of great body mechanics going on there. And also you can see opposing action when she turns around to look. So that opposing action is when one part goes one way when the other. So you can do opposing action like this. So the arms come up as the body goes down. That's an opposing action. And so when she's got the coffee and she turns, like it's opposing action. So there's some really nice body mechanic stuff. So it would have been really difficult and a lot of work to do this. But yeah, he's done a great job.
Nice. That's a good analysis. As far as the aesthetics, I really liked the lighting and shading of, there's like the softness to it, which I wonder if you guys agree that it didn't, the 3D nature of it didn't stick out to me that much. Like I almost wondered if it was a grease pencil before I watched the making of. Did you guys get did it feel 3D to you, or did you think that it confused you about like what medium it actually was?
I thought originally when I was watching it that like it was a little bit of both, that like some objects were 3D, some were 2D, and I wasn't sure exactly which ones were which, and that they just like blended really well together. So even looking at it now, like if I hadn't like watched the behind the scenes, I don't think I would know what's 3D and what's not, except the things that are obviously changing perspective.
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
me, it was a video game thing where you got your side scroller, so you've got the platform which is 3D, and then everything else was kind of like background flat, to just like a side scroller. You know, if it's not
Right.
important, it's in the background and it's flat.
Right.
Whereas if it's important, it's in that front plane, and it's 3D.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
That's what I assumed too. Because I don't know Blender as well, I thought all the backgrounds were 2D and then the characters in the foreground and then some of the objects were 3D.
Interesting.
But
So
it was all 3D is what you're saying.
It's all 3D.
yes.
Yeah, I did see the thing that was shared on social media where they zoom out of the scene and you go, oh, that whole set is one big set. And I thought that was really clever. Like, so I didn't expect that. I would have expected it to be, oh, here is the one set for that section, and then they cut to the different thing, and they did with editing or compositing, put the background in there. But it's to see it zoom out and it's one massive set. You're like, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Almost should have showed that. That sounds really neat.
Yeah, I actually downloaded the production files because I had the same question that Rita in the chat just asked. Any grease pencil used in the animation? And I don't think so. The file that I opened, the lighting scene, again, like it's all, it's like one big set, and there is some compositing tricks to transition the lighting between scenes, but you can see the entire animation with all the backgrounds in one scene. And I did a search for grease pencil objects and got nothing. So I would have expected the let me go find it in VLC.
All
Whenever,
the white stuff, like
the white stuff, like that flash
Yeah.
effect. I thought for sure that would have been grease pencil, but it's
Oh, that's not?
it's like mesh objects, like little mesh like planes that are
What?
all animated. I know.
Nice.
But I was investigating because I couldn't help but think, like, was 3D the most efficient way to go about it?
I guess it comes down to the tool that you know.
Are familiar with.
So, like, if you're not familiar with grease pencil and drawing, like, or drawing as good as what Tim does, then you're going to use whatever way works for you. And when you're in production, sometimes using like an outdated or whatever is the best way to go, because it's going to get you the result that's fastest, even though it might not be technically, oh, okay, we could do this with grease pencil, but it's going to take me a week longer than if I spend the afternoon doing it in the way that I know. So obviously sometimes you have to go speed, rather than let's push ourselves. But that's the one thing that I do like about how the Blender cloud and the Blender, all the stuff is open, is that if you do have these questions, you can go and research it and go, oh, just open up the file and take a look. Is there any grease pencil in there? How did they do that? Is that a lattice that they've got there? How are they stretching the characters? Which I think is really great. And I mean, imagine if you could do that with all the films, like Spider-Man. You're like, how did they do that? And you just go and open up the Spider-Man scene and you go, no, I know how to do that. So I think it's really great that they share everything and they're open in that way.
For sure. Super unique. That's a really good point. We're kind of blending over into the technical side of things, so I suppose we could just continue that way. Let's see, some interesting little, I guess, bits of information that I wouldn't have guessed is that the softness that they achieved was by putting was largely due to putting subsurface scatter on like everything.
That was like the one thing that I had in my notes as well. It was like, oh, that's super clever. Just give it like a giant radius.
Right.
And it'll just make everything look nice and soft. And it works really well.
Yes, it works so well. I mean, I feel like they were exhaustingly authentic with the concept art. Like they match it almost perfectly. So I really respect that.
So does that, I know they're using Eevee for this, but does that add render time? The subsurf, like if they're doing it to everything, does that mean
definitely.
like, yeah,
it has
and
to.
How much render time are we? And I'm asking you to guess because this is your department. I make stuff move. I've got no idea about this, but how much extra time does it add to it?
So I did open the file to test, and no scene I've ever developed in Eevee took that long to compile the shaders. I did not even finish it. It was like after 5 minutes, it was like 8% done compiling the shaders, and I was like, I don't have time for this actually. So I don't know how long it took. I mean, once you compile it once, maybe like a lot of it's stored in RAM, but I almost certainly it's not real time. Like there's no way it was close to real time.
It's going to be a while because like even compiling the shaders, that's just getting the node tree and stuff. But like subsurface scattering, each layer of it is going to be another sample. And so it's going to have to sample that, especially with such a wide radius. It's going to be sampling that probably quite a few times. I don't know. You could probably look it up in the file, but like I would guess at least like probably over 40 for that, which it's not going to be like completely re-rendering, but it's still like, yeah, it's going to slow it down a good bit.
So is that another case where if it's going to take them that long, is it easier to do that where they just put subsurface scattering on everything and then deal with the extra time that adds, because maybe they just send it to the render farm and not worry about it? Whereas if you're doing a personal project, you'd have to be more selective about that. And you go, okay, well, I need to for efficiency and speed and being able to work on these things, you need to separate it. You go, okay, I'm going to separate everything into the background and then not have subsurf on I keep saying subsurf, but I mean subsurface scattering. So separate it from the files and then combine it with compositing, or use compositing tricks to separate it out so you can work faster on that scene. Like does that subsurface scattering, does that affect, because I know when I'm animating, right, anything that slows down the viewport or whatever, it's just you got to turn it off because you want speed. Now, is this going to affect, if everything is in one file, is that going to affect the speed of that, or are things linked into this one file? I know you're the one who's opened it, Kent. So is everything linked in?
I should be able to answer that. I believe there are links. Okay. I don't think it's actually all in one file, but like, I guess I mean that there's not. From what I could tell, there's not. I'm kind of talking out of my butt right now, but there's not like a typical shot structure, right? Where there's this set built and it's all self-contained. Like each set and each scene change is part of the same blender, like the same consistent scene, I guess. Like you were saying, and it's rounded too. Like it has this arc. But they're definitely linking stuff in. I know he mentioned that in the making of.
And also, like with subsurface scattering, like you can turn that off fairly quickly for everything at once. So I don't think that'd be like an issue when animating, because you can just check the box and you're fine. And they probably just did that just to save production time and not worry about the render time, because like you could definitely get the same effect by texturing things to give it that soft glow, or you could, again, like you were saying, like separate out the foreground and the background and all the different pieces and like light them differently. And make sure like, okay, this light is only shining on the background here, just adding a little bit extra softness. You could do that all manually, but that's going to take more time. So they probably were just more focused on getting the work done quickly and then just throwing it at the render farm is my guess.
Yeah, let the computer do the work.
Right.
But I think that's an important thing, especially for if you're trying to make your own project. It's like you got to know when to make those decisions, because if something's going to slow you down every day, then how can you speed it up? And that might be, okay, just separating that from a different file or whatever, or using proxies, or importing it in from somewhere else and working on just a simplified version, because otherwise, like, you're going to lose time every day working on a file that takes like 40 minutes to open.
Right. I feel like it must have been an experiment, and he like, how do we get this to look more stylized and more like the art? And he just probably checked on subsurface and was like, that works brilliant. Let's just go with that. Because even
super creative.
Yeah, right. I feel like even with subsurface on everything in Eevee, you're still probably not looking at more than like a minute render time. Would you agree with that, Lampel? Just guessing.
I have no idea.
Okay. Because I've been working on a scene right now with that's volumetric clouds that like is rendering the same scene with different samples different sample distribution like 4 times, and it's only like 2 minutes. So
Oh yeah, I have no idea because like, yeah, it's a lot of subsurface scattering, but it's also on all like a bunch of different objects, and then it has to calculate them for all the objects individually. So like, I when that all adds up, I have no clue what that would actually.
Right. I was really thrown off by the shader compilation because that's very different than the actual render time, right?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. Well, I mean, it's included in the render time.
Per frame, or do you think it stores that stuff in?
Oh, I think it stores it.
Okay, that's what
I would
think
assume.
too.
Though they were okay, so I watched the making of, and there was uh, a section where they covered where they switched. They did like a Python switch between
right.
2 different like parts of the material on different frames. So I'm sure if they did that, maybe, or maybe it just calculated the entire thing, and even like switching it didn't have to recalculate on the nodes. I really don't know. That's a bit above my head there.
I didn't dig that far into the files themselves. And if anybody's interested in the technical bits, definitely go watch the making of. It's on the Blender YouTube channel. So they get a little more nerdy, whereas I kind of like that we focused a little more on the narrative and like, you know, filmmaking part of it. But
were you surprised, I guess last note on the materials, were you surprised by how many nodes they were using and like how complex the shader graph was when it like everything looks like it's like kind of diffuse-ish of like single colors?
Point. I didn't think of it when I watched it, but now that you mention it, and when I watched the film back just myself, I do imagine them being a lot simpler than what I saw in the shader graph. That's a good point. Was that the compositing or the shaders themselves?
I'm pretty sure that was the shaders.
Okay.
Maybe I'm misremembering, but
I'm wondering now too if I'm misremembering.
But perhaps they did a bunch of like procedural textures and stuff.
Right.
I would not be super surprised by that if Simon is
true
the guy doing it. So
I know what you're talking about. Like every scene had that, like all the lighting was part of like one massive shader tree. That
something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
I'll have to go back and rewatch that.
Yeah. And you guys need to watch it too. It's really interesting.
I have no idea what you guys are
okay. Yeah, Tim. So but that's about as nerdy as I planned on getting. That's all of my points. I do have a quiz, I guess, that people can take unless anyone has something else to say. Any closing thoughts?
One last thing.
Yes.
So when you were talking all the technical stuff, since I had no idea what you're talking about, I was watching it on mute, and I realized when she first gets her coffee, it's during the happiest scene in where what is assumed to be when she gets asked, you know, for marriage proposal, and then she runs through, she's sipping it throughout, and then when she jumps off the cliff with the baby, she not only loses the baby carrot or the cart that it's in, but then her coffee also gets dislodged from her hand. And there's this weird, I didn't even, obviously, I think I like to pick apart movies, and maybe this was total not planned at all. But when she's reaching out for the baby carriage, the coffee is actually in between her and the baby carriage. And then it gives you the question of, is she reaching for the baby or her addiction? Ooh. And then it loops and she hits the car, because that's probably her worst memory of losing the baby. And then she hits the car, revamps, and then she's back in the coffee shop getting a new coffee at her best memory again. So I think that's kind of an interesting where it ends and where it begins.
That's clever.
I didn't connect that like the coffee with the good memory, and I think that's like a super good observation. I think that adds a lot to the like idea behind it.
Sometimes I wonder though if I'm just reaching for meaning, because I know my friends always like, Tim, that's probably not what the director meant to do at all. But I like to think that the directors do have like hidden intention like layered throughout any project that they create, and it's up to like the viewer to get out of it whatever they choose to. And that's why something like this I find far more interesting than Spring, where Spring feels very much like force-fed what you're supposed to get from it. Where, well, this one's not perfect, I do think it gives you more to at least analyze. Anyways, that was it.
No, 100%. Yeah, that's why I like having you on here. You find those things that most people do not. And I don't know about like when I animate something, if it's not driven by like purpose or intention, like those kind of decisions, I find it hard to animate, because those decisions make it easy to know what the next motion is going to be. Like in that situation, where is the coffee cup placed in that scene? Like, with if you don't have that intention, like, how do you answer that question? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I would bet it's intentional based on.
Well, I feel for any animators, especially you, Wayne, because I'm sure these are the type of questions that for doing like the in-between substantial significant moments, the way you animate, you want it to be purposeful without it being distracting. And I feel like sometimes the best animation, or at least this is what my teacher told me way back in the day, is the animation you don't notice. And I feel like a lot of the time that's what animation is trying to have really good animation so that the viewer doesn't get distracted by how off it is.
Well, yeah, there's sometimes there's that. It's like you want to guide where maybe I'm not going to answer the question correctly, but you want to guide where you want the audience to look. So if you're acting in a real thing, or if you're like animating, and the main point is this person's talking or whatever, and you're not that main person, you shouldn't be flailing your arms around or whatever, because you want the audience to be looking in the right spot. So some of those decisions are made when you're animating. It's like, what is the main point? We want the audience to be looking here. And then sometimes it's like, well, you have to move. There's certain decisions that you make because of the body mechanics or whatever. That person has to move to get from A to B. So some of them are, some of the choices and whatever, like maybe the coffee cup in the middle was intentional. So it's like, what is she looking at? But it's also possible that it could have just made a nice arc. So there is that, like, well, I don't know. So,
good point.
And it's also possible that it could have been close. It might have been close to making a nice arc. And then Hjalti has thought, oh, what if we put it in the middle, like so it is perfectly, and adjusted the animation afterwards. So those type of moments pop up as well. It's like where you have them on the fly is maybe not the right term, but it's like, oh, if I tweak this idea, I can add an extra meaning to it, an extra layer to it. But you know, if that had have arced and it was a nice, beautiful arc, and it's rotating around, and it wasn't in line, it doesn't. I don't think people are going to notice that, but it's nice when, I guess, Eagle Eye Tim goes through and goes, oh, well, I found extra meaning to it.
Well, and probably speaking to the nature of what you're talking about, that's probably why they did highlight certain things as white, because there's so much going on. It's so fast paced that to have the viewer looking exactly where they wanted you to look, they almost had to highlight things, or else I don't think the story, I think it would have been harder to pick up on the loop without, you know, some kind of visual cue.
Yeah,
sure. That made me think of a question for you, Wayne. Like, personally, if this was handed over to you, one of the things that we critiqued was like, oh, it's not quite obvious enough that things are changing, or like how things are changing between the two. And you brought up the idea of like focus and like what's moving, what's giving this scene motion. So how would you have a character that's running through a scene that obviously is the main character, that's one of the focal points, but also have the viewer focus on this secondary action that's like, in a lot of these cases, are moving very slightly. They're not having these large expressions or things. They're just kind of little tweaks. How would you draw attention to that without making it too confusing for the viewer?
Yeah, that's the thing where you probably, I know it's called Coffee Run, and the whole thing is you want to make the character move, but when the character is moving, that's generally what the audience is going to be looking at, except for when you are playing a video game. Then you know, like, that's my character, and you're obviously you're controlling it or whatever, and you're not looking at the character because you know what's going on. You're looking at the scene around it, and those things are usually highlighted through lighting, or because, as you've spoken about, things are in the background, they're like flat, but things that you're meant to pay attention to are obviously lit, and they're 3D. So I think he was trying to play a little bit of a I think it could have been a bit more of a balancing act, where if she has to slow down and shows the audience, oh, she's looking at that memory or whatever, and like, so she stops. Maybe she stops when she's in the when the floor falls down. She stops and she looks at them for just a beat, and then the floor falls. You know, that gives the audience a bit of a second or half a second to look and go, oh, she's paying attention to that. I should be paying attention to that. Because if it's just moving, you're just going to be looking at the character that's moving the whole time because you aren't playing that video game. But if you are playing the video game, it's like when you're watching someone else play a video game, you can sometimes be very disoriented and you get a little bit dizzy. But when you're playing that video game, you know exactly where you're looking and what you're going to do. So yeah, he had a hard job of trying to balance that, of showing where you want them to look, because I think it did. You miss it a lot of the times. And you're like, oh, what was that thing back there? I missed it. And then thankfully it hasn't changed by the next time you come around. You go, oh, I saw it that time.
That's a good point. It's a good perspective.
I almost sometimes wonder if it would be as simple as while she's running through to have her look and like as she's passing, just look at, the two characters that we're supposed to be paying attention to for that brief moment.
Yeah, it's little moments like that. So maybe pausing to looking backwards. Yeah, those little moments. Yeah, I think you're right, and that shows the audience, or just gives them an inkling to, oh, you should be paying attention to that, and you don't need to be overt with it, but just a little bit more of a hint would have been good. But it is a difficult thing. Like it's a very difficult task to do.
That made me have one more thought, actually, that I wanted to ask you guys about. So the ending for me, I found to be a little on the pessimistic side, which a lot in my life is I can be pessimistic. If you were able to ask my wife, she'd be surprised that I would say deep down I'm an optimist. And so for her to at the very last scene, whenever she looks back and at the proposal, and for the first time, she kind of like acts like she can engage with them and like maybe stop it. And then it goes to the last scene where she's like, I guess, mega depressed in her apartment and all surrounded by coffee. To me, I got the impression that it was like the last thought in the short was, if I just didn't get married, if I just didn't start this relationship, I would be okay. Did that resonate with anyone else?
I mean, if we could think of alternate endings on the spot, I think, okay, the cat that was violently thrown out of the window each time. Imagine if she picks up her coffee from the coffee shop. She sees the memory of her. As she goes to drink it, the cat comes up, and instead of drinking from the cup, she puts the cup down and then holds the cat. And then that's how it ends, as a way to like stop thinking about it, stop your addiction, and have some moment of solace with this cat that you've been throwing through a window.
Yeah,
that is good.
Like I always think of like little tweaks that can really impact, like have such a big impact on story. Yeah. And since I try to watch a new movie every day, there's all these times that when they end on a pessimistic note, the conclusion I've come to is it's a direct reflection of the director's view of the world, or maybe their view in general. Because if someone is truly optimistic, they wouldn't end something they're creating or a story or whatever in this manner, because it definitely leaves the viewer then also in that same state of mind. And I don't know, I think I sometimes am a little harsher when things end on such like a super dark note, when it feels like it could have been tweaked just even a little bit to give it just a glimmer of hope. Because when it ends on that much bleakness, it kind of, the experience for me then gets a little spoiled.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. Or give it some sort of like Inception thing where it's like it's not clear and like it's up to the viewer to interpret, and like they can add, they can take away whatever they're also feeling in the moment and then like maybe connect to it that way, rather than having it be like super clear one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I can totally see that
I like
scene with the
Tim's
cat
ending.
walking.
Or maybe like she goes to drink it and the cat knocks it out of her hand and he goes, no, and picks her up and throws her out the window.
You could go for the ridiculous ending where then the cat throws the girl out the window. It's like super anomaly.
Oh man, that's good stuff.
All right, but your interpretation is interesting, Kent, to be honest.
Huh. Oh, what did you just say? Sorry.
So the way that you interpreted that ending, I find really, really interesting.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't mind like a downer ending when it like resonates with a truth that resonates with me. But for me, I don't know. I just had the adage pop through my head, like it's better to have loved than lost, and never to have loved at all, or you know how that saying goes. Yeah. Like I know it's debatable, like how true that is, but like if she hadn't gone through this relationship, would she have enjoyed when it was good, enjoyed the baby coming, like kind of you have the good with the bad. I don't know if that's better than not having that at all, but anyway, that's just my last thought. All right, then I do have a little quiz. I like to do that with the streams to give an opportunity for some points to be earned. So it's kind of more like a trivia than a quiz. I don't know if we went over everything in this particular presentation, but yeah, for anyone still watching, we'll do that and then we'll call it finished and go from there. Copy run trivia. All right, so the way it'll work, I'll read the question and then start this 10-second timer. Post your answer in the chat, and honor system. Try not to cheat and look at other people's answers. But
we answer. Do we give them? Do we know the answers? What is the question? Help me out.
I know the answer. You can maybe wait 10 seconds and then you guys can guess or whatever.
I'm gonna write mine down.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write
good idea.
Number 1. Oh no! Whoa! Hold on. I'm breaking things. Oh, there.
Kent's really good at technology.
Oh gosh. Seriously, what is happening? Okay, we're back. Number 1. How many Blender artists contributed to the film's production? Blender artists is highlighted. I'm going to start this here timer.
You said that in our first loop.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Okay, I wrote down my answer.
3, 2, 1. And there's probably a delay. That's probably super loud. A delay.
I said 17 and 12.
So there were answers A, B, C, and D.
Oh,
My bad.
What?
You're killing me.
For the people, for you guys not watching the stream, everyone else got it. But the answer was 7 Blender artists. 17 total.
I didn't see the A, B, C, or D, so I guessed 6.
You were the closest.
Close.
Though I did watch the making up, so that's kind of cheating.
You just did your homework.
Next question is, what unexpected material property created the soft look to everything? Unexpected material property.
Easy.
We definitely went over that one. Gosh,
I don't even do 3D and I know this answer.
I will reset the timer and let y'all guess.
But you don't even need 10 seconds for that.
Yeah.
I get no love as the host of this. One time we're doing for you guys, the 3 of you, we're doing a modeling a backhoe, like long project. And one of the quiz questions was, how much does this thing cost, like to buy the actual thing? And everybody gave their answers. And then I didn't realize, I just looked up the used price. Like that's what I got. And they ripped me up and down for not clear about that. And okay, we're done. The answer to that one is subsurface scatter C.
Mm-hmm.
I just wrote SSS because
that's what I wrote.
Nobody got time for that.
Number 3. The flash effects that occur when the protagonist jumps between scenes, and there's a picture of it, that white substance that's kind of, magical. How was this achieved? A, mesh objects. B, grease pencil. C, particles. D, flip fluids.
Man, I am acing this quiz and I did not study.
You got
and
the
you're not
first one
even the
wrong,
Blender
too.
technical person either.
Oh, I'm just really good at listening.
All right. So the answer is A, mesh objects. Nice.
So I remember you saying that in the file it was mesh objects. That's what I wrote down. But I did assume that some of it had particle effects with the objects applied. So it didn't have any particles at all.
I wish I still had the scene open. It was so let's see here. I don't think you can see the stream, but I have a screenshot of it where it's like when you take a freeze frame, she's kind of enveloped in like a goo, almost like a cell, and then there's all these little circles coming off of her, and then there's like these anime type like rays coming out, like when you see an anime explosion. And in the scene, every single individual circle and ray is like a flat mesh.
Interesting. Okay, nice.
But I didn't look through it. Maybe there are some particles attached to that, so you could be right about that. Number 4, the protagonist is a modified version of which Blender Cloud character? We did happen to touch on this thanks to Wayne, I think.
Big Buck Bunny.
A, Sintel, B, Spring, C, Agent 327, or D, Rain.
Sure, it's not Big Buck Bunny.
Oh, now you're making me rethink my answer.
Come on, I was gonna make that exact same joke.
The girl's name was Spring in the last short, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Spring and Autumn was a dog.
That's right. And then Winter should have been the big animals, I think. The answer is D, Rain. Yeah, not that good at listening.
No one go acing
I
it.
wrote it down and then I crossed it out and put Sintel because I thought they looked similar.
Well, I was trying to trick with that one, so
Got me.
that worked out. All right, number 5, last one. How was motion blur implemented? Was it A, faked with stretched geometry in the rig? B, a beta version of Eevee motion blur? C, cycles vector pass plus vector blur node? Or D, there was no motion blur? Tim, I would be shocked if you got this.
So, since I don't understand anything of what you just said, what was the question? How was it used?
How was it implemented? Because the main render engine that they used at the time did not support motion blur. So, but they still had it in the short. How did they do it?
Well, I just wrote down it was used well.
Answer E. Well played. The answer is C. It was a cycle vector pass plus vector blur node.
Oh, of course.
Of course.
I got that one wrong.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we've been using on the project you and I have been working on.
Yeah.
So
Secret.
That's one of the workarounds where you have to render it in cycles with like black materials, and then you render it in Eevee, and you combine. Yeah.
It's a workaround, but that's kind of Blender's MO.
But 2.9, hopefully that motion blur is stable and it works, and it's all good. So no more workarounds.
Yeah, I haven't tested it yet, but I'm eager beaver to test it. All right, well that's it. Post, for those of you in the chat, post how many you got right out of 5, and I will go through and add those points times 10. So if you got all 5, you get 50 points.
Ugh, I got 20.
Hey, I'll go into your account and do that, Tim, just for kicks.
What if we now get to relive this moment and do the quiz again? Do you think we would have made better choices? Or do we have to choose the same answers, just slightly tweak them?
I try not to think about those intrusive thoughts, Wayne.
That's right. That's right. Just put the coffee down and move on with your life.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for doing this. Every time we have one of these conversations, I go into the world with like calibrated glasses for how to watch films, and I appreciate that very much. So
always a pleasure.
Stay healthy, and with that, we will sign off. So goodbye.
See you guys later.
Goodbye.